In 1945, an American destroyer pulled a drowning German submarine engineer from the freezing Atlantic. 6 weeks later, he wasn't in a prison camp, breaking rocks. He was teaching at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This isn't just a forgotten footnote. This is the story of how the American century was truly built, not just with bombs and bullets, but with a radical, strategic foresight the history books almost always miss. Dr. Hinrich Müller stood at the front of that lecture hall in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He stared at 50 American naval officers, the very men he had been trained to kill, now taking notes on his every word. The absurdity was staggering. 3 months ago, he was a ghost in a steel coffin, designing electric torpedoes in a bunker outside Hamburg, while Allied bombs turned his world to rubble. 2 months ago, his U-boat, U-873, was shattered by American depth charges in the North Atlantic. Oil-black water had flooded past his knees. 6 weeks ago, he had surrendered to American sailors, certain he would spend years in some remote, desolate labor camp. Now, he was teaching advanced submarine warfare to the enemy at MIT. He had a chalkboard, hot coffee, and a paycheck. He watched a young lieutenant frantically sketch the very torpedo guidance system Hinrich had just explained. The same system that had sent 17 Allied merchant ships to the bottom of the sea. The same system Hinrich had sworn an oath to keep secret. The same system, he was shocked to learn, the Americans didn't even need him to reveal. They had already reverse-engineered 3 of them from salvaged wreckage. They just wanted to know if their analysis was correct. Every single calculation was correct. Dr. Müller, the lieutenant asked in careful, academic German, why did you mount the gyroscope here instead of here? Hinrich picked up the chalk. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer, profound absurdity of the moment. 6 weeks ago, he would have taken that secret to his grave. Now, he was being paid to answer it. He had 5 theories about why the Americans were doing this, some kind of elaborate trick, a psychological game, a display of arrogance. All of them were wrong. The truth was simpler and far more strategically impressive. To understand how a German submarine engineer ended up at MIT instead of digging his own grave, we need to go back to the moment his world shattered. April 17th, 1945. The North Atlantic, 200 miles east of Newfoundland, U-873 was dying. The American destroyer, the USS Buckley, had come out of nowhere. Hinrich had been checking a faulty solenoid in the forward torpedo room when the first depth charge hit. The explosions walked up the hull like a giant's footsteps. Rivets popped like champagne corks. Steam pipes burst. Men screamed. Hinrich had been through depth charge attacks before, 3 times in the last year. But this was different. These Americans, they knew exactly where to drop them. This wasn't the desperate, scattered guessing of 1943. This was cold, precise, and technological. They weren't lucky. They had technology Hinrich didn't understand.
Outward, any
Surface!
Will register as a
Surface!
blip on the cathode
Kapitän Lieutenant Steinhoff was shouting from the control room. But the diving planes were jammed. Hinrich grabbed a wrench, his engineering mind still racing even as ice-cold seawater poured through a split seam. If he could just bypass the hydraulic line, The second depth charge hit directly above the control room. Everything went white,
Es ist
then
blockiert, Herr
dark,
Callejon.
Mehr Druck.
then wet.
Halten Sie die Tiefe.
When Hinrich came to, he was floating face up, lungs burning.
Los!
The submarine had
Helft mir!
surfaced on its
Wir müssen
own,
das Leck abdichten,
but the
sofort!
hull was cracked open like an egg. Men were already in the water. Around him, the North Atlantic was a chaos of oil, slicks, debris, and the cries of dying men. He could taste diesel fuel. His ears rang. Somewhere to his left, a young ensign, barely 19, was crying for his mother. He expected the American destroyer to machine gun them in the water. That is what the propaganda films had promised. That is what happened to enemies of the Reich. In Goebbels' newsreels, American soldiers were ruthless barbarians who took no prisoners. The destroyer's bow cut through the wreckage toward them. Hinrich closed his eyes, waiting for the bullets. Instead, he heard English words. "Grab the line. We've got you." He opened his eyes. American sailors were throwing life preservers. Not shooting. Throwing life preservers. Young men leaning over the rails, shouting encouragement, tossing ropes to their mortal enemies.
Schnell! Vorwärts!
What are they
Wir
doing?
müssen hier weg.
Steinhoff gasped beside him. "I don't know," Hinrich said. But this was the first crack in his worldview. The propaganda was a lie. But the truth was far more complex than mere humanitarianism. This was policy. This was strategy. American sailors hauled Hinrich onto the destroyer like he was a long-lost cousin. Strong hands grabbed his arms. Someone, a medic no older than 22, wrapped him in a wool blanket that smelled like cigarettes and coffee and checked his pupils. "You're going to be okay, buddy," a sailor said, draping his own dry jacket over Heinrich's shoulders. An hour ago, this German was trying to kill him. Now,
Ich weiß
he
nicht.
was clothing him. Another medic handed him something hot in a metal cup. It was soup. Beef and vegetable soup. Real vegetables. Heinrich's hands shook. When was the last time he'd tasted real beef?
Sailor moves decisively,
January?
capturing the
His
black
training
knight,
officers
the
had
engineer,
sworn
securing
American
a
ships
vital
were
position on the
soft,
board.
weak,
Got him!
that they wasted resources. The soup tasted like victory. This act of simple humanity was more disarming than any weapon. It was a psychological masterstroke. Müller wasn't just being saved, he was being acquired. "You're an
Pupils are
officer."
reactive.
An American lieutenant commander stood over him. Not hostile, just processing.
You're gonna be okay, buddy.
Name and rank. Dr. Hinrich Müller,
Menacing and
Korvettenkapitän,
The U-boat's
engineering
eye scans the
specialist.
surface, searching
Hinrich
for its
waited for the
next
beating.
target.
Doctor of what? Electrical engineering. Technical University of Berlin. 1938. The American's eyebrows went up. Specialization. This had to be the trick. Torpedo guidance systems. Hinrich heard himself say. The American wrote it
A
down,
hearty meal,
tore off a
providing
sheet,
essential sustenance
and
for our
handed it to
brave
another
troops
officer.
on the front lines.
Get him dry clothes. Put him with the technical group. Command is going to want to talk to this one. A technical group. Not prisoner batch 9. Not interrogation cell. This was the moment Hinrich Müller ceased to be an enemy, combatant, and became a strategic asset. The war in Europe was ending. The war for technological supremacy, the war that would define the next 50 years, was just beginning. And Hinrich didn't know it, but he was about to become one of its first, and most important, acquisitions. May 2nd, 1945.
You're an officer?
Fort Hunt,
Back.
Virginia. The facility was officially designated by a cover. P.O. Box 1142.
Dr. Hinrich
But
Müller.
Heinrich had been around enough military
Korvettenkapitän.
installations to
Engineering
recognize an
specialist.
interrogation facility when he saw one. The fences, the guards, the quiet intensity. It was a place designed to dismantle men and extract
Electrical
their
engineering.
secrets.
Technical
Except
University of
this
Berlin,
was unlike any
1938.
interrogation he had been trained to expect. The Gestapo, his own nation's secret police, operated on a foundation of fear, brutality, and psychological torment.
Specialization?
He expected shackles, stress positions, darkness, cold, the endless, grinding pressure of hopelessness. Instead, he was shown to a regular room, with a regular table and regular chairs. There was even a window. Heinrich could see Virginia trees outside, green with spring growth. An American officer, a commander named William Spears, sat across from him. Between them, a fresh pot of coffee, 2 cups, and a pack of American cigarettes. This was not an interrogation. This was an acquisition. "Walk me through the T-11 acoustic torpedo," Spears said, sliding a highly detailed technical drawing across the table. Hinrich stared at it. The drawing was accurate. Frighteningly, devastatingly accurate. The Americans had already figured out 90% of the system just from reverse engineering the wreckage his U-boat crew had failed to destroy. They had identified the hydrophone array, the signal processing circuit, even the detonation trigger mechanism. "I do not have to tell you anything," Hinrich said, his voice sounding weak even to himself. "Geneva Convention?" Spears nodded, completely unbothered. "That's correct. The Geneva Convention protects you." He lit a cigarette, offered one to Hinrich. Heinrich, his hand still shaking slightly, took it. His first real cigarette in 6 months. "But here's the thing, Doctor," Spears continued, leaning forward. "We've got the hardware. We've got the how. What we don't have is the why. Why you made certain design choices. Why you mounted the hydrophone array at this angle instead of that one. Why you used this signal processing algorithm instead of something simpler. Why do you care?" Hinrich asked, genuinely confused. "The war is ending. Berlin is falling." Spears looked at him like he was a child. "Because we want to make better torpedoes, and because Japan is still fighting. We need every advantage we can get in the Pacific." It was so simple, so American.
Walk me
Not,
through the T-11.
"How do we protect against this?" but "How do we make ours better?" This was the first revelation. But the second one, the one that followed, was the one that would truly break Hinrich's world
That's
apart.
correct.
Also,
The Geneva Convention
Spears
protects you.
continued, tapping ash into a tray, "We are going to need submarine engineers for reconstruction. Germany is going to need to rebuild its entire maritime infrastructure. Every port, every shipyard, every commercial vessel.
But here's the
A
thing,
lot of
Doctor.
civilian maritime engineering
We've got the
jobs coming
hardware.
up." He paused, letting the implications land. The War Crimes Tribunal is going to hang
we
the
don't
SS,
have
the Gestapo,
is the why.
and anyone who ran a concentration camp. But engineers who just did engineering? Nobody is prosecuting you for making a good torpedo. This was the moment. The click. Heinrich felt something crack inside his chest. This wasn't about the past. This was about the future. Spears was offering
Why do
him
you
a
care?
choice. Not between loyalty and treason, but between obsolescence and relevance. The Americans weren't just winning the war. They were planning the peace. And they were planning it with the ruthless, pragmatic efficiency of a corporate takeover. They were
Because we
sorting
want to
the
make better
assets from the
torpedoes.
liabilities. The ideologues, the true believers in Nazi horror, were liabilities. They would be tried and hanged. But the technocrats, the brains, the men like Hinrich who built the
Pragmatic
weapons,
reality of the
they were
situation
assets.
finally became clear.
They were human capital. In the emerging calculus of the post-war world, a world that would soon be defined by a new Cold War, a brilliant engineer was worth more than a fleet of captured ships. This was the unofficial, unwritten beginning of Operation Paperclip. You want me to help you? Hinrich stammered. I'm saying your expertise has value, Spears corrected him. Hitler is dead. Your U-boat fleet is destroyed. The question now is not about winning the war we've already won. The question is, what happens next? What you want to do next? Spears pushed the drawing closer.
A lot of
So,
civilian.
The
jobs.
hydrophone array. Why that angle? Heinrich looked at the diagram.
But engineers?
He looked at the coffee. He looked at the American officer, who saw him as an engineer first and an enemy second.
Nobody is
He looked out the
prosecuting you.
window at the peaceful Virginia springtime. He picked up a pencil. The angle, he said, his voice hoarse, reduces cavitation noise from the torpedo's own propeller. And he began to explain. Over the next 4 weeks, Hinrich learned something that staggered him. It wasn't just Spears. It was the whole system. P.O. Box 1142 wasn't a prison. It was a filter. A processing center for high-value intellectual assets. Commander Spears brought in a parade of American engineers. Men from MIT, from Caltech, from the Naval Research Laboratory. They didn't treat Hinrich like a prisoner. They treated him like a colleague, a rival academic they had finally gotten into a room. They showed him American torpedo designs and asked for his feedback. They argued with him about acoustic signatures, battery efficiency, and hull metallurgy. And they questioned everything. Hinrich had spent 3 years at the Marine Technical School in Kiel. The instructors were brilliant, yes, but they were rigid. Everything was doctrine.
I'm saying your expertise
Everything was
has
hierarchy.
value.
You did not question the Herr Professor's torpedo design,
Your U-boat
even if you
fleet
saw a
is
flaw.
destroyed.
To question was to imply criticism. Criticism implied disloyalty. And disloyalty meant a visit from men who did not offer coffee. The Americans questioned everything.
Question is, what happens
Why did
next?
you use copper wiring here instead of aluminum? An engineer from Caltech asked, pointing to a
What you want to
schematic.
do next?
Weight savings, Hinrich said automatically. Aluminum is lighter, but copper is more conductive, the American shot back. Doesn't the resistance loss cost you efficiency? In Germany, Hinrich would have said. Those were the specifications, and the conversation would have ended. Here, they actually wanted to discuss it. Yes, he admitted. We lost approximately 3% efficiency, but the weight savings allowed us to carry more battery capacity, which gave us longer underwater endurance. For the Atlantic routes, endurance mattered more. Huh, the American said, making notes. Trade-offs. What if you used copper, but reduced battery capacity slightly? They spent an hour gaming out variations. Not because there was a war to win. Germany had surrendered 3 weeks ago. But because they were engineers,
Calculations for the V2 guidance
and they
system
were
must be
obsessed
precise.
with solving the
We
problem.
can compensate for the
This,
atmospheric drag at this
Hinrich
point.
realized, was America's true secret. It wasn't just more resources. It was more minds working in parallel, free to think, free to question, free to fail, and free to try again. It was a system that valued merit over rank and solutions over doctrine. It was an operating system for a superpower. June 1st, 1945. 6 weeks after his capture, a young, confident MIT engineer named Patterson pulled Hinrich aside after a technical session on battery thermal management. The transition from prisoner to consultant had been so swift, it was disorienting. Commander Spears says you might be interested in some teaching work, Patterson said, as casually as if offering him a ticket to a baseball game. MIT is going to need submarine warfare instructors for the naval training program. Hinrich's mind reeled. At MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Yes, you'd be perfect, Patterson replied, ticking off points on his fingers. PhD from a top technical university, combat experience, design background. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, as if enemy engineers became American professors every day.
But
Pay is
longer
decent.
underwater endurance.
Housing stipend. Cafeteria's not bad. Cambridge is nice in the fall. The sheer, banal normality of the offer was what stunned Hinrich the most.
Trade-offs.
I am a prisoner of war, he stated, feeling the words lose their meaning as he said them. Patterson almost shrugged. Yes,
Germany had surrendered.
right now. But Spears is working on that.
If
It's
we
a
adjust
new
this
technical
knob, the
parole
frequency
program.
stabilizes.
This was the
Yes,
new
that correlates
content,
with the data on the
the
clipboard.
30% analytic layer.
This
This was not an act of kindness. This was the opening move in a new kind of war. The war with Germany was over,
Might mobilized
but
for
the war for global
producing the
technological
aircraft
supremacy,
that
the
would
one
secure
that would
victory.
soon pit America against the Soviet Union, was already beginning. Men like Spears weren't just interrogators. They were the world's most aggressive talent scouts. They were harvesting the intellectual capital of the Reich before the Russians could. The Navy needs expertise for the Pacific campaign, Patterson continued, giving the official justification. And for whatever comes after. After. There was going to be an after. Hinrich had been so focused on simple survival, on making it through each day, that he hadn't truly comprehended a future. The Americans, it seemed, had been planning his future for weeks. Think about it, Patterson said, handing him a folder. Classes start in September. June 15th, 1945, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Commander Spears was a man of his word.
2, 3.
Hinrich was not sent to
Yes,
a
you'll
POW
be
camp.
perfect.
He was put on technical parole, a legal gray zone created specifically for high-value assets like him. He had a small, one-room apartment near campus. It was Spartan, but it was his, and it had heat and running water. He had a library card for the world's greatest technical library, a meal ticket for the faculty cafeteria, and a teaching schedule. His first lecture was on submarine pressure hull design.
Yes, right now.
As he walked into the lecture hall, he expected hostility. He was, after all,
What the
teaching
public
men
sees
whose
is merely the
brothers and
surface,
friends
the acts
might
of
have died from the very
humanitarianism.
technology
Yet
he
the
had
overwhelming
perfected.
bulk-
He was the enemy, standing at a chalkboard, but the hall filled with officers who brought notebooks. They were silent, focused, and professional. They asked technical questions without a trace of personal animosity. They wanted to know about stress calculations, about welding techniques, about the German approach to silent running. They took notes like their lives
Faced
depended
with
on
such
it,
fanatical
because they
resistance,
did.
the urgency
Some of
the
these men would be
campaign could not
commanding
be
submarines in
overstated.
the Pacific
There was
within
going to be
months.
an after.
After the class, as the officers filed out, one young lieutenant remained. He stood by Heinrich's desk, not speaking. His jaw worked silently. His hands clenched and unclenched. This, Heinrich thought, is it. This is the moment of reckoning. The technical questions were one thing. This was going to be the human cost. Dr. Müller, Dr. Müller, the lieutenant finally said, his voice tight.
Classes start in
My
September.
brother was on a destroyer that got hit by a T-11. Atlantic convoy duty. February 1944. He survived, but 23 men did not. Hinrich's stomach dropped. He felt his throat tighten.
It's a room.
How many brothers had his torpedoes killed? How many sons? How many fathers? The engineering was clean. The results were this. I am very sorry, Heinrich managed to say. The lieutenant nodded slowly, absorbing the perfunctory, useless apology. But then, the American pivot. The one thing Hinrich could never have predicted. The lieutenant was not there for revenge. He was not there for an apology. He was not there to assign
As we
blame.
discussed last week,
He was
the
there to
principles of
solve a problem.
hydrodynamics apply equally to
I just
submarine
wanted
design
to
as
understand
they do
how
to
the
surface
targeting
vessels.
worked, the lieutenant said, his eyes filled with a terrifying, pragmatic intensity. Because we need to design better countermeasures.
Professor, what about the...
My brother is still out there, still on convoy duty. I want to make sure what happened to his ship does not happen again. He wasn't angry.
Agreed.
He wanted
Let's
to
review the
learn.
acoustic dampening next.
He saw
And so the
Hinrich
calculation for the
not as a
acoustic
war
detonator must be
criminal,
exact.
but as a
Ensure
data
the depth
set,
gauge is set precisely
a
according to the
resource.
current salinity
He
levels.
was an American, and he had a problem to fix. Heinrich, stunned into silence, began to explain the acoustic signature recognition algorithm. The lieutenant listened, asked sharp, intelligent questions, and took detailed notes. By the end, the lieutenant was sketching on the chalkboard potential jamming technologies, ways to confuse the acoustic sensors, ways to save American lives. We might have something here,
The theoretical
lieutenant
brilliance
said,
of the laboratory
more
often
to
finds its
himself
grim
than
consequence
to
upon the
Hinrich.
battlefield.
He looked at the German professor. Thanks for your time, Doc. He offered his hand. Heinrich, his mind completely fractured,
My brother was on a
shook it.
destroyer.
He stood alone in the lecture hall, the chalk dust settling. What had just happened? This wasn't just good intelligence practice. This was something deeper, a fundamental cultural difference. The lieutenant had compartmentalized his grief, his anger, his patriotism, and processed the entire encounter as a technical problem. He had just collaborated with the man who designed the weapon that nearly killed his brother, all in the name of making a better version. This was not weakness. This was not naivete. It was a terrifying,
very sorry.
profound, and utterly ruthless form of pragmatism. It was a system that didn't just defeat its enemies. It consumed them, reverse-engineered them, and absorbed their strengths. And Hinrich was now a part of that system. Dr. Patricia Wilson, an MIT physics professor, explained it to him over lunch in the faculty cafeteria. Hinrich had been nervous, but Wilson, sharp-eyed and direct, had invited him specifically.
I am sorry.
She represented the academic, civilian side of the same pragmatic machine he'd met in the military.
I just wanted
You
to
have to understand American engineering culture, Doctor, she said, stabbing
My
a
brother
piece of
is still out
meatloaf.
there.
We do not care if the idea came from Germany, Britain, Japan, or Mars. If it works, We want to know how and why. If it doesn't work, we want to know why not.
Right,
This
now.
was a fundamental departure from the German system, which was built on the authority of the Herr Professor. Wilson's philosophy was different. It was a market-driven, capitalist approach to knowledge itself. An idea had value based on its performance, not its origin. Edison, she continued, tested 10,000 light bulb filaments before he found one. The Wright brothers crashed dozens of planes. We learned from failure. We budget for it. That's how progress happens. But I was your enemy,
Might have something here.
Hinrich insisted, still grappling with the moral and logical disconnect. Wilson took a sip of coffee.
Doc,
You were. Past tense. That was a political classification. Now, you are an engineer who knows things we don't know. That is a practical classification. Why would we waste that? She gestured around the bustling cafeteria. This whole country is built by people who came from somewhere else. My grandparents came from Ireland during the famine.
what?
The man running the cyclotron lab fled Italy in '38. We are used to learning from people with different backgrounds. It's our entire national brand. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Hinrich finally understood. It wasn't just a patriotic motto. It was an economic strategy. It was human capital acquisition on a global scale. America was a holding company for the world's talent. He thought of the Technical University of Berlin. After 1935, it became a fortress of ideological purity. Brilliant Jewish professors, men who had won Nobels, were expelled.
Dr. Patricia Wilson.
Their work was denounced. Their value was determined by their blood, not their minds. Germany had not just lost these scientists, it had given them to the Allies. It had actively handed its intellectual assets, Einstein, Lise Meitner, Hans Bethe, to its primary competitor. It was an act of strategic self-mutilation. We lost, he said quietly, the admission tasting like ash. Because you think like this, and we did not. Wilson shrugged, finishing her lunch. You lost because you started a war and made powerful enemies. But yes, this open-source approach to knowledge certainly helped us win it. Over the following months, Hinrich discovered the numbers. And the numbers explained everything. The sheer, terrifying scale of what America had built dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. His homeland, Germany, had produced approximately 1,150 U-boats during the entire war. This monumental effort had used every shipyard in the Reich, every ounce of steel they could scourge, every engineer they could draft or coerce. It was the total focus of their naval war. He looked at the American figures. America had built over 200 submarines, but it had also built 2,700 Liberty ships, a new one hitting the water every 41 days. It had built 147 aircraft carriers, 860 destroyers, and more aircraft than the rest of the world combined, all while feeding its own troops, feeding Great Britain, and secretly developing the atomic bomb.
Out of many, one.
He finally asked Patterson during a tour of a naval facility in Connecticut. They were watching a submarine hull being welded on an assembly line. How did you build so much? Germany devoted everything to the war, everything. And you still outbuilt us by factors I cannot even calculate. Patterson pointed at the assembly line, at the welders in their masks and coveralls. See those workers? Half of them are women. Hinrich looked closer. Patterson was right.
We lost.
During the Depression, Patterson explained, they couldn't get jobs because men had priority. Now,
You lost
they're
because
welding pressure hulls and wiring electrical systems. He gestured to a woman in coveralls checking blueprints. That woman over there, lead designer on the electrical systems, got her degree from Cornell, but no firm would hire her in '39. Now, she's one of our best. This was the answer. It wasn't just resources. It wasn't just the fact that America's industrial heartland was a continental fortress, untouched by enemy bombs, while Germany's was being pulverized. It was the people. The Nazi
Every
system was
engineer
built on a
understood
pyramid
the
of
critical
exclusion.
nature of their task.
Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church.
Total focus.
That was the defined role for half its population. It wasted its women. It exterminated its Jews. It alienated its conquered peoples. It was a system that intentionally, proudly, wasted its human capital in the name of ideological purity. You let anybody who can do the job do the
2,700
job,
Liberty ships.
Patterson continued, his voice sharp. Your system wasted half its brain power. You had brilliant Jewish scientists, Einstein, for God's sake, and you drove them out. They came here.
More aircraft.
They worked for us. We used everybody who could contribute. That's how we built so much. Hinrich stared at the assembly line. He saw women and men, black workers and white workers, all building a submarine together. For all its own deep, hypocritical flaws, the segregation, the racism, the American system, when pushed, was fundamentally more pragmatic. It valued contribution over purity. You won, Hinrich said. The final piece, clicking into place. Because you did not waste your people. Patterson nodded. That's exactly right. The sailors who threw those life preservers in the North Atlantic, they weren't just being humane.
See those workers?
They were the intake valves. They were the first step in this
Wiring
vast,
electrical
continental-scale talent acquisition pipeline. They were the moment
Lead
an
designer.
enemy liability was identified, salvaged, and processed into an American asset.
No firm
That was
would hire
America's
her.
real weapon. September 1948. 3 years later, the man in the modest
she's one
office
of our
at the
best.
Massachusetts Institute of Technology is no longer Korvettenkapitan
Final piece of the
Müller,
puzzle.
prisoner of war.
The how.
He is Dr.
This is the
Hinrich
deepest,
Müller,
most fundamental
a
realization.
tenured professor.
It was the people.
The transformation is absolute. His English is fluent. The German accent, now just a faint trace, a relic of a former self. He is grading exams on acoustic wave propagation. In the 3 years since his capture, he has not been idle. He has published 2 foundational papers on acoustic guidance, papers that are already forming the bedrock of the U.S. Navy's next generation of submarine technology. He has trained over 200 American naval officers, many of whom now write to him from their postings in the North Atlantic and the Sea of Japan. The enemy has changed.
Do the job.
The mission is no longer about hunting German U-boats. It is about containing a new, sprawling red shadow, the Soviet Navy. Hinrich's work is,
He saw
once
women
again,
and men,
on the front line
black
of a global
workers.
conflict. A knock on his door. A young German student enters. He is 19, the same age Hinrich had been when he started at the Technical University of Berlin, full of arrogant pride in German engineering. But this young man is different. He is part of the first wave of German students allowed to study in America under the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan. Officially, a $15 billion American investment to rebuild a shattered Europe. But Hinrich, now fully integrated into the American strategic mindset, sees it for what it truly is, It is the second phase of the very operation that saved him. Phase 1 was intellectual acquisition, harvesting the brains of the Reich, like him and Wernher von Braun, before the Soviets could. Phase 2 was industrial and ideological reconstruction. This was not charity. It was the most profound and audacious geopolitical investment in human history. It was the decision to rebuild Germany and Japan as allies, to turn former enemies into frontline bulwarks against the new communist threat. This student wasn't just here to learn. He was here to be integrated, to be shown the American method, and to be sent back home to rebuild
Professor
Germany
Müller?
as a partner. The student, who grew up in the rubble of Hamburg, speaks with Hinrich for an hour in their native German. He is brilliant, hungry, and entirely free of the ideological poison that had infected Hinrich's generation. He has seen firsthand what rigid certainty had cost his nation. Finally, he asks the question,
Seize it for what it truly
Professor
is.
Müller, why did you stay in America? You could have gone home after the war, helped rebuild Germany directly. Hinrich turns and looks out his office window at the campus. Students walk between classes. Americans, British, French, and now German and Japanese students.
He was here to be
All arguing over
integrated.
textbooks. He sees a laboratory where American and German engineers, men who had been trying to kill each other 4 years ago, are now working side by side. Because I learned what Germany forgot, Hinrich says quietly. Engineering is not about national pride. It's not about following orders or building weapons to prove you are a master race. It is about solving problems. And you solve problems by bringing the best minds together,
Professor Müller.
regardless of
Why did
where
you
they are
stay?
from or who
Rebuilding
they used to
Germany
fight for.
directly.
He turns back to the student. My system, the one I
The
served,
latest report on the
was a
differential
closed
analyzer
loop.
is quite promising.
it was rigid. It valued ideological purity above all.
A laboratory
It
at the
expelled any
Massachusetts
data,
Institute of Technology,
any
where the
person
urgent demands of the war
that didn't
effort
fit
pushed
the
boundaries
narrative.
of analog
It
computation.
drove out its
Working
best
side by
minds.
side.
It was brittle. And when the pressure came, it shattered into a million pieces.
Because
He
I
gestures
learned
out the window. This system is an open one. It's chaotic. It argues with itself. It's built on dissent, but it listens. It takes in new data even from its captured enemies. And it adapts. It learns. It gets stronger from the very things that would have destroyed my old world.
together.
America didn't fly me to MIT because they were soft or naive. He continues, his voice hardening with the conviction of his new life. They did it because
it was
they are
rigid.
practical. Why waste expertise? Why hold grudges when you can build something better? My superiors in Berlin were thinking 1 year ahead. The Americans were thinking 50 years ahead. That, he says, is why they won. And that is why they will keep winning. The young German student takes notes, nodding slowly. My professor in Hamburg said the same thing. The student replies, he said Germany's future is in cooperation, not competition. He then picks up the graded exam, switching to English, the language of his new life. Now, let us talk about that exam problem you got wrong. Hinrich Müller had fully expected to spend the remainder of his useful life in a prisoner of war camp, breaking rocks or digging ditches. A forgotten casualty of a failed regime.
They did it
Instead,
because they are practical.
the Americans put him on a plane, flew him to one of the world's most elite universities, and handed him a piece of chalk. This decision, baffling to the German mindset, was not born from naivete. It was not a soft-hearted gesture of forgiveness. It was a
The
cold,
Americans were thinking
calculated,
50 years
and
ahead.
brilliant strategic masterstroke. The American leadership, unlike their German counterparts, understood a fundamental truth of the modern age. Expertise does not disappear just because a war ends. They understood that the mind of an enemy engineer could be reprogrammed, repurposed, and transformed into an allied professor. And they understood, with chilling foresight, that the German submarine designer who had sunk their ships could just as easily teach them to build better, quieter, and deadlier submarines for the next war. The one that was already beginning in the shadows
Instead,
against the Soviet
the
Union.
Americans.
The Americans won the peace, not just the war, by turning their enemy's intellectual capital into shared knowledge. This was the new face of global power. Hinrich Müller, the asset, trained American officers who would go on to design the nuclear submarine fleet. Those submarines, running on principles of acoustic silence that Müller helped pioneer, would keep the seas safe for the West throughout the entire Cold War. The countermeasures he helped design saved countless American lives in conflicts Germany would never even participate in, and the cycle of investment continued. Heinrich's German students,
submarine designer,
the ones who studied under him through the Marshall Plan, went home. They didn't build a new U-boat fleet to menace the Atlantic. They rebuilt Germany's maritime engineering industry peacefully, profitably, and as unshakable American allies. Germany had tried to hoard its expertise, to build a fortress of ideological purity, and it failed. America tried to share its expertise, to create an open network, and it built the strongest military and economic alliance in human history. That is not weakness. That is strategy. Hinrich Müller, on that sinking U-boat, thought the Americans possessed some kind of magic, some inexplicable trick or bottomless resource advantage that let them build faster and better. He was wrong. They did not have magic.
Thought the
They had a
Americans
method,
possessed magic.
and that method, built on the simple, revolutionary, and ruthlessly pragmatic idea that smart people should be allowed to solve problems, regardless of which side they used to fight for, rebuilt the entire world in its own image. Dr. Hinrich Müller taught at MIT until his retirement in 1972. He trained over 800 naval officers and published 17 foundational papers on submarine acoustics. He became an American citizen in 1954,
Dr. Hinrich Müller,
fully integrating into the system that had captured him. He never returned to live in Germany, though he maintained a robust correspondence with colleagues there, acting as a bridge for the very knowledge network he had joined. His former students went on to design the nuclear submarines, the Los Angeles, the Ohio classes that formed the backbone of America's strategic deterrent, keeping the Cold War from turning hot. Some became admirals, commanding the very fleets he helped make possible. Others became professors themselves, teaching the next generation of American engineers the Müller method of acoustic design. When he died in 1981, his obituary appeared in both American and German engineering journals. The American obituary called him a bridge between former enemies. The German obituary called him a son of Germany who helped rebuild the world. Both were correct. The enemy who became a colleague. The prisoner who became a professor. That was not a fluke of history. That was America's secret weapon.